A strange encounter. Captain Jake Westwood adjusted his visor as he stepped off his small, battered spaceship, the starbound rover. The planet's surface was unlike anything he had seen before. Thick, glowing purple grass stretched as far as the eye could see, and towering trees with crystal-like leaves sparkled under the twin suns. The air smelled faintly of citrus, and every now and then soft chirping sounds echoed through the dense forest. Bolt, Jake's trusty robotic companion, hovered beside him, scanning the environment. Atmosphere breathable. No immediate threats detected, Bolt reported in its metallic voice. Good to know, Jake replied, slinging his plasma rifle over his shoulder. But years of space exploration had taught him to never let his guard down. The most beautiful places often hid the deadliest dangers. As he ventured deeper into the forest, Jake's boots crunched against the soft, luminous grass. He had landed here after detecting a faint distress signal, though it was weak and garbled. Someone, or something, needed help. His gut told him this was no ordinary rescue mission. Just as Jake reached a clearing, he heard it, a faint rustling noise behind him. He froze, his hand instinctively going to his rifle. Bolt whirred softly, ready to assist. Who's there? Jake called out, his voice steady. The rustling stopped. For a moment, there was only silence, broken by the distant chirps of unseen creatures. Then, from behind a thick tree, a figure emerged. It was small and frail, with skin that shimmered like blue glass under the sunlight. Wide, silver eyes stared at Jake with a mix of fear and curiosity. It was a young alien girl, no older than 10 in human years, dressed in tattered, leaf-like garments. Her hands trembled as she clutched a makeshift spear. Jake raised his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. Hey there, he said gently. I'm not here to hurt you. The girl didn't move. Her eyes darted to Bolt, who floated closer. She let out a sharp, high-pitched sound, something between a warning cry and a plea for help. Jake realized she was terrified. Relax, he said in a calm voice, nodding toward Bolt. He's harmless, just a walking toolbox with an attitude. Bolt's single eye blinked, a gesture of acknowledgement. Correction, I am far more than a toolbox, the robot replied, though the humor was lost on the girl. Jake crouched down to appear less intimidating. He pointed to himself. Jake, he said, tapping his chest. Then he pointed to her. The girl hesitated before responding in a soft, melodic voice. Nia. Nice to meet you, Nia, Jake said, offering a small smile. He glanced at the spear in her hands, noting its crude design. Whatever she was running from, it wasn't something she could fight off with that. Before he could say more, a distant roar shook the air. It was deep and guttural, the kind of sound that made every instinct scream to run. Nia's eyes widened in pure terror. She dropped the spear, grabbed Jake's arm, and tugged him toward the forest, speaking urgently in her alien tongue. Bolt, translation, Jake asked, though he already understood the message. They needed to move. Processing. She's saying, danger. It's coming, Bolt replied. Jake didn't argue. He let Nia lead him into the dense forest, her small hand gripping his sleeve tightly. The roaring sound grew louder, closer, sending flocks of glowing bird-like creatures scattering from the treetops. Whatever was coming was big, and it wasn't friendly. They reached a hollowed-out tree, its massive trunk forming a natural shelter. Nia pulled Jake inside and motioned for him to stay quiet. She pressed a finger to her lips, her silver eyes glinting with urgency. Jake nodded and peeked out through a crack in the tree. The forest was eerily still now, the kind of silence that came before something terrible. His pulse quickened as he scanned the shadows, his grip tightening on his rifle. A low growl echoed through the clearing. Jake caught a glimpse of movement, something large and fast, slipping between the trees. It was too quick to get a clear view, but its sheer size was unmistakable. Whatever it was hunting them. Nia clutched Jake's arm, her small frame trembling. He looked down at her and gave a reassuring nod. "Don't worry. I've faced worse," he whispered, though he wasn't entirely sure if that was true. The growling grew louder, circling their hiding spot. Jake's mind raced. He had no idea what they were up against, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let anything happen to Nia. Whoever she was, whatever her story, she needed his help. As the first clawed foot stepped into the clearing, Jake took a deep breath, preparing for what was to come. The hidden threat. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Jake could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on him like a heavy cloak. The Skarath's roar had faded, but its presence lingered like a shadow over their every step. Nia led the way now, her movements swift and deliberate, yet cautious. She seemed to know the forest well, weaving through dense undergrowth and glowing vines with the agility of someone who had spent her entire life here. Jake followed closely, his grip on his plasma rifle firm. Bolt hovered just above them, its sensors scanning for any signs of danger. "Bolt, keep a 360-degree scan running," Jake said quietly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Already in progress," Bolt replied, its voice tinged with a hint of nervousness, if a robot could feel such a thing. No immediate threats detected. Jake wasn't reassured. He'd been in enough tight spots to know that the worst dangers often didn't announce themselves until it was too late. Nia suddenly stopped and raised a hand, signaling for them to halt. Her silver eyes were locked on something in the distance. Jake followed her gaze and saw it. A set of massive claw marks gouged deep into the trunk of a tree. Each mark was as wide as his forearm, and the bark around them was scorched black, as if burned by acid. Jake let out a low whistle. "Whatever made those isn't something I want to meet." Nia turned to him, her expression a mix of fear and urgency. She spoke quickly in her melodic language, gesturing to the claw marks and then to the forest ahead. Bolt translated in its monotone voice. "She says this is Skarath territory. We are intruding." Jake sighed, his shoulders tensing. "Great, just great. Any advice on how not to end up as its next meal?" Nia hesitated, then pointed to the ground. She knelt and drew a quick, rough sketch in the dirt with her finger. The image was simple but clear, a towering creature with sharp claws and glowing eyes. She added a series of lines around it, radiating outward like a sunburst. "What's that?" Jake asked, kneeling beside her. Bolt scanned the drawing and processed the data. She indicates the Skarath has a heightened sensory ability. It can detect heat, movement, and sound over vast distances. Jake's brow furrowed. "So we're basically running from a walking death machine that can track us no matter what we do." Nia nodded solemnly. "Wonderful," Jake muttered. "This just keeps getting better." Nia added another drawing, this time of a tree with strange, bulbous fruit hanging from its branches. She pointed to it, then to the forest ahead, speaking with urgency. Bolt translated. "She says these fruits emit a pheromone that can mask our scent. If we find them, we might evade detection." Jake's eyes lit up. "Now we're talking. Nia, lead the way." The group moved quickly, every step feeling like a gamble. The forest seemed alive with unseen eyes, every rustle of leaves and crack of a branch putting Jake on edge. He caught glimpses of movement in his peripheral vision, small, scuttling creatures that vanished the moment he looked directly at them. Finally, Nia stopped beneath a tree that matched her drawing. Its branches hung low, laden with glowing orange fruits that pulsed faintly, as if alive. Jake wasted no time, pulling out his survival knife and slicing one of the fruits free. The smell hit him immediately, sharp and sweet, like citrus mixed with something metallic. Not exactly my favorite scent, but if it keeps that thing off our backs, I'm not complaining. Nia showed him how to crush the fruit and smear its sticky sap onto their skin and clothes. Jake followed her lead, grimacing as the sap clung to his hands like glue. Even Bolt got a coat of the stuff, though the robot made its displeasure known with a series of indignant beats. "Stop whining," Jake muttered. It's better than being Skarath Chow. As they finished, the forest erupted with a distant, guttural roar. This one was different from before, deeper, more menacing. It wasn't a warning. It was a hunt. Nia's face paled, and she motioned for them to move. Jake didn't need to be told twice. They sprinted through the forest, their feet pounding against the glowing ground. The roar grew louder, closer, accompanied by the sound of trees snapping like twigs. "Bolt, status," Jake shouted over the noise. "The Skarath is closing in. Approximately 300 meters, and gaining," Bolt reported, its voice unusually tense. Jake's mind raced. The fruit's pheromones might mask their scent, but the Skarath wasn't relying solely on smell. It was fast, relentless, and smart. If they didn't think of something soon, it would catch them. They reached a narrow ravine, its edges steep and jagged. Nia stopped abruptly, her eyes darting between Jake and the gap. She said something in her language, her tone pleading. Bolt translated. "She says we must jump. It's the only way." Jake glanced at the ravine, then back at the forest. The sound of the Skarath crashing through the trees was deafening now. They were out of time. "All right," Jake said, gripping Nia's hand tightly. "On 3. Nia nodded, her silver eyes wide with determination. Jake took a deep breath, the roar of the Skarath echoing in his ears. 1, 2, 3. They leaped into the unknown as the forest erupted behind them. The monster in the shadows. The ravine stretched deep and dark below them, but Jake's grip on Nia's hand didn't falter. They had landed hard on a narrow ledge, their breathing ragged and hearts pounding. Above, the Skarath's guttural roars echoed, each sound a reminder that it was still hunting them. Jake pressed his back against the cool stone wall, trying to calm his racing heart. Nia crouched beside him, her silver eyes darting nervously toward the edge. Even Bolt, usually unshakable, hovered closer than usual, its sensors spinning in overdrive. "We're safe for now," Jake said, though he wasn't entirely sure if that was true. "But that thing isn't going to give up so easily." Nia said something in her melodic tongue, her tone sharp and urgent. Bolt processed her words and responded, its voice unusually subdued. "She says the Skarath never stops once it marks its prey." Jake let out a frustrated sigh. "Fantastic. We're dealing with a monster that doesn't know how to quit." "Got any good news, Bolt?" The robot paused, its sensors whirring. "Analysis. The Skarath's territorial instincts may work in our favor. If we can reach the outer edge of its hunting grounds, it might abandon the chase." "Might isn't exactly reassuring," Jake muttered. He glanced at Nia, who was now watching him intently, as if waiting for him to make the next move. "All right, let's keep moving. Staying here is a death sentence." They began to navigate the narrow ledge, the ravine's cold wind whipping at their faces. Nia moved with the grace of someone used to the terrain, her bare feet finding secure footing where Jake's boots occasionally slipped. Bolt floated beside them, scanning the path ahead and behind. As they progressed, the atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick with tension. The glowing plants and vibrant colors of the upper forest were gone, replaced by jagged rocks and creeping vines that seemed to writhe in the shadows. The only light came from faintly luminescent moss that clung to the walls, casting an eerie green glow. Jake's instincts screamed at him that they weren't alone. The Skarath might not have followed them directly, but that didn't mean it wasn't nearby. Every sound, every shifting shadow felt like a potential threat. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Jake saw it, a flicker of movement in the darkness above. He stopped abruptly, holding out an arm to halt Nia. She looked at him, confused, until he pointed toward the ledge above them. Something massive was there, just beyond the edge of the light. Its silhouette was almost imperceptible, blending seamlessly with the shadows. But then its eyes glowed, a pair of piercing red orbs that cut through the darkness like twin flames. Jake's breath hitched. "It's here," he whispered. Nia froze, her wide eyes locking onto the glowing red gaze. She clutched Jake's arm, her fingers trembling. Bolt hovered closer, its sensors now blaring warnings. "The Scarath has located us," Bolt confirmed, its usually calm voice edged with urgency. "Evasion is critical." The creature didn't roar this time. Instead, it moved with eerie silence, its massive form slinking along the upper ledge like a predator stalking its prey. Jake could see the glint of its obsidian scales, each one catching the faint light like polished onyx. "Stay close," Jake said, gripping his plasma rifle. He gestured for Nia to move behind him. "Bolt, options." The robot scanned rapidly. The ledge ahead narrows into a tunnel. It may provide temporary cover. "Temporary is better than nothing," Jake muttered. "Go." They broke into a run, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls. The Scarath moved above them, its glowing eyes tracking their every step. Jake could hear its claws scraping against the stone, a sound that sent shivers down his spine. The tunnel entrance loomed ahead, a jagged hole in the rock that barely looked wide enough to fit them. Jake pushed Nia forward, urging her to crawl inside. Bolt followed, its slim frame squeezing through the gap. Jake was the last to enter, sliding into the narrow space just as the Scarath leaped from the ledge above. The beast's claws struck the ground where Jake had stood moments before, sending a shower of debris into the tunnel. Jake scrambled backward, his heart pounding as the creature's massive head loomed near the entrance. Its glowing eyes peered into the darkness, its breath hot and rancid as it sniffed the air. For a tense moment, the Scarath seemed unsure, its head tilting as if deciding whether to pursue them. Jake held his breath, his rifle trained on the creature's face. If it came any closer, he'd have to shoot. But he wasn't sure a single plasma shot would stop something that big. Finally, the Scarath let out a low growl and retreated slightly, its red eyes disappearing from view. Jake exhaled shakily, his hands trembling. "Bolt, status?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Scarath has withdrawn temporarily. Its behavior suggests it is assessing the situation," Bolt replied. "It will not leave for long." Jake turned to Nia, who was huddled against the wall, her face pale. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're not out of this yet, but we'll figure something out. I promise." Nia looked at him, her fear giving way to a glimmer of hope. She nodded, her trust in him unwavering despite the danger. Jake leaned back against the wall, his mind racing. The Scarath wasn't just a mindless predator. It was smart, patient, and relentless. If they were going to survive, they'd need more than luck. They'd need a plan. And fast. The plan. The tunnel stretched deep into the rock, its walls cold and slick with moisture. Faint luminescent moss provided just enough light to navigate, but the oppressive darkness ahead made it feel like stepping into the maw of a giant beast. Jake, Nia, and Bolt huddled together in the narrow space, the sound of their breathing amplified in the confined area. Jake's mind raced. The Scarath was still out there, circling, waiting. Its intelligence wasn't just terrifying. It was downright unnerving. Every time they thought they'd outmaneuvered it, it found a way to reappear, adapting to their every move. Running wasn't going to cut it anymore. "We need to change the game," Jake muttered, breaking the heavy silence. He glanced at Bolt, who hovered quietly beside him, its scanners still spinning. "Bolt, give me everything you've got on the Scarath. Weaknesses, patterns, anything." Bolt beeped, its sensors glowing faintly as it processed the data. The Scarath exhibits heightened sensory capabilities, particularly in detecting movement, heat, and sound. It also demonstrates territorial behavior, suggesting a preference for maintaining dominance within its domain. Jake nodded, his thoughts clicking into place. Territorial, huh? That means it's not just hunting us. It's defending its turf. If we can make it feel threatened, we might force it to back off. Nia tilted her head, her silver eyes narrowing in confusion. Jake noticed and gestured for Bolt to translate. The robot beeped, relaying Jake's words in Nia's language. She listened intently, her expression shifting from confusion to cautious curiosity. "She says the Skirath fears one thing," Bolt translated after Nia spoke in her soft, melodic voice. "Light. Specifically, intense bursts of light can disorient and repel it." Jake's eyebrows shot up. "Now we're talking. Why didn't we lead with that?" He looked around the dim tunnel. "We'll need to lure it into a position where we can use that weakness. But first, we need a way to create enough light to actually scare it off." Bolt paused, processing. "The plasma core in your rifle could be repurposed to generate a high-intensity flare, but doing so would render the weapon inoperable." Jake frowned. His rifle was his only reliable defense, but this wasn't a fight he could win with firepower alone. "All right, Bolt. Let's reconfigure it. Better to have a chance than no chance at all." Nia watched as Jake unslung his rifle and handed it to Bolt, who began dismantling the weapon with its precise mechanical arms. She crouched beside Jake, pointing to the tunnel walls and speaking rapidly. Bolt translated as she explained. "She says this tunnel connects to a larger cave system where we can set a trap. The Skirath is too large to maneuver easily in tight spaces, giving us an advantage." Jake nodded. "Good. Tight quarters, limited visibility. If we time it right, we can light it up before it even knows what hit it." Bolt finished its work, handing the modified rifle back to Jake. The weapon's barrel now housed a glowing core, humming faintly with energy. "Plasma flare is ready. Warning, this is a single-use modification. Once activated, the core will be completely depleted." "Got it," Jake said, slinging the rifle over his shoulder. He turned to Nia, meeting her wide, nervous eyes. "This is our shot, Nia. Are you with me?" She hesitated for a moment before nodding firmly, her small hands clenching into fists. Jake smiled, her courage a spark of hope in the otherwise dire situation. They moved deeper into the tunnel, guided by Nia's intimate knowledge of the terrain. The air grew colder, and the sound of dripping water echoed through the darkness. The narrow passage soon opened into a massive cavern, its walls glinting with crystalline formations that reflected the faint light of their surroundings. "This'll do," Jake said, surveying the space. The cavern's high ceiling and uneven floor created natural choke points that could work to their advantage. Nia pointed to a large stalagmite near the center of the cave, speaking quickly. Bolt translated. "She suggests using the formation as cover. It will shield us from the Skirath's initial attack while we position ourselves for the flare." "Smart kid," Jake said, giving her a thumbs up. He crouched behind the stalagmite, motioning for Nia to do the same. Bolt positioned itself nearby, its sensors focused on the tunnel entrance. The weight was excruciating. Every creak of the rocks and drip of water felt magnified, like a countdown to their encounter with the beast. Jake's pulse thudded in his ears, but he kept his focus sharp. The Skirath would come. It always did. And then they heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate the very air around them. The faint glow of the tunnel entrance darkened as the massive shadow of the Skirath appeared, its glowing red eyes cutting through the gloom like twin suns. Jake gritted his teeth, gripping the modified rifle tightly. "All right, big guy," he muttered under his breath. "Let's see how you like a little light show." The Skirath entered the cavern, its movements slow and deliberate, like a predator savoring the moment before a kill. It sniffed the air, its razor-sharp claws clicking against the stone floor. Jake could feel its presence, oppressive and overwhelming. As it closed in, "Now," he shouted, rising from behind the stalagmite. He aimed the rifle at the center of the cavern and pulled the trigger. The plasma core ignited, releasing a blinding burst of light that filled the entire cave. The Skirath roared in agony, rearing back as the intense brightness overwhelmed its senses. It thrashed wildly, its claws tearing at the air as it tried to retreat. Jake grabbed Nia's hand and bolted for the far side of the cavern. "Come on, while it's distracted." Behind them, the Skirath's roars echoed louder than ever, But for the first time, they weren't filled with confidence. They were filled with fear. The showdown. The Skarath's enraged roars filled the cavern, shaking loose fragments of rock from the high ceiling. The blinding flare of light had disoriented it, but only for a moment. Now, the beast was thrashing wildly, its massive claws tearing through stalagmites and sending shards of stone flying in all directions. Jake, Nia, and Bolt crouched behind a jagged rock formation at the far end of the cave, their breaths ragged from the sprint. The modified rifle had done its job, but Jake knew the flare was only a temporary solution. The Skarath wasn't retreating, it was adapting. "Bolt, status report," Jake whispered, peeking out from their cover to assess the situation. Bolt's sensors whirred as it scanned the creature. The Skarath's visual capabilities are impaired, but its heightened senses of sound and heat remain fully operational. "It is searching for us." "Great," Jake muttered. "We've got a blind monster with excellent hearing and a nose for warm bodies. Just our luck." Nia tugged at his sleeve, her silver eyes wide and pleading. She pointed to the cave floor, where shimmering crystals scattered in clusters near the walls. She spoke in hurried tones, her melodic voice rising slightly with urgency. "She says the crystals emit a cold vapor when disturbed," Bolt translated. "They may help mask our heat signatures." Jake's eyes narrowed as he studied the crystals. "Cold vapor, huh? That might buy us some time. All right, Nia, show me what to do." Nia grabbed a loose shard of stone and hurled it toward the nearest cluster of crystals. On impact, the crystals shattered, releasing a fine, misty vapor that spread quickly through the air. The temperature around them dropped noticeably. Jake grinned. "Smart. Let's give our big friend here a game of hide and seek." They moved cautiously, smashing crystal clusters as they went, spreading the vapor throughout the cavern. The Skarath, now visibly frustrated, sniffed the air and swung its massive head from side to side. Its glowing red eyes flickered weakly, unable to fully recover from the flare. "Keep moving," Jake urged, leading the group toward a narrow passage on the far side of the cavern. The Skarath's roars echoed behind them, each sound more feral than the last. Just as they reached the passage, the Skarath let out a deafening roar and lunged in their direction. Its massive claws struck the ground where they had been moments earlier, sending a shockwave through the cavern. Jake grabbed Nia and pulled her back as debris rained down around them. "That thing's not giving up," Jake shouted, gripping his plasma blade, the only weapon he had left. The Skarath turned toward the sound of Jake's voice, its movements more calculated now. It crouched low, preparing to pounce. Jake's heart pounded as he realized they were cornered. The passage was too narrow to escape quickly, and the beast was closing in. "Bolt, ideas," Jake barked, his mind racing. "Generating options," Bolt replied, its voice calm despite the chaos. "Recommendation: utilize the cavern's unstable ceiling to create a controlled collapse. Estimated success rate, 72%. Jake glanced upward at the jagged rocks above the Skarath. A plan began to form in his mind, though it was risky. "All right, let's make this thing regret coming after us." He turned to Nia and gestured toward the passage. "You and Bolt get to safety. I'll handle this." Nia's eyes widened, and she shook her head vehemently. She grabbed his arm, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. She spoke quickly, her voice rising in pitch. "She says you can't fight it alone," Bolt translated. "She wants to help." Jake hesitated, torn between admiration for her courage and the weight of the risk. "All right," he said finally, "but stay behind me. Let's do this together." He moved toward the center of the cavern, drawing the Skarath's attention. The creature's glowing eyes locked onto him, its massive frame coiled like a spring. Jake raised his plasma blade, its blue energy humming faintly. "Come on, you ugly piece of work," Jake muttered, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "Let's dance." The Skarath lunged, its claws swiping through the air with terrifying speed. Jake dodged to the side, the beast's attack narrowly missing him. He slashed at its flank with the plasma blade, leaving a glowing scar across its obsidian scales. The Scareth roared in pain, but the wound only seemed to enrage it. Nia, meanwhile, darted to a nearby cluster of crystals and smashed them with a sharp stone. The cold vapor spread quickly, disorienting the creature further. Bolt hovered above, using its sensors to locate weak points in the cavern ceiling. "Jake now," Bolt called out. "Target the stalactites above the Scareth." Jake looked up and saw a series of massive stalactites hanging precariously from the ceiling. He nodded and activated the plasma blade's overcharge function, sending a concentrated burst of energy toward the ceiling. The blast struck the base of the stalactites, shattering them and sending a cascade of rock and crystal down onto the Scareth. The creature let out a final deafening roar as the debris collapsed around it. Dust and vapor filled the air, obscuring the cavern in a swirling cloud. Jake coughed and waved his hand in front of his face, trying to see through the chaos. When the dust settled, the Scareth lay motionless beneath the rubble. Its massive frame was pinned, its glowing eyes dimming as its life force faded. Jake collapsed to his knees, exhausted but alive. Naya ran to his side, her silver eyes filled with relief. She knelt beside him, gripping his arm tightly. "Good work, team," Jake said with a weak smile. He looked at Nia and Bolt, his gratitude clear. "We did it. Together." But even as the danger passed, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The final stand. The cavern fell silent, save for the faint hum of Bolt's scanners and the echo of distant water dripping from the jagged ceiling. Jake leaned against a rock, catching his breath. The Scareth lay buried beneath a mountain of rubble, its massive frame motionless. For the first time since they'd encountered the creature, Jake allowed himself a moment of relief. Nia sat beside him, her small hands trembling but steadying as she clutched a shard of crystal. Her silver eyes flickered with a mix of triumph and exhaustion. Bolt hovered nearby, its sensors dimming as it powered down non-essential functions. "We did it," Jake said, his voice hoarse. "That thing's not going anywhere now." Bolt beeped cautiously. "Correction. The Scareth is immobilized, but life signs are faintly detectable. It is not entirely neutralized." Jake's relief evaporated. He pushed himself to his feet, his legs shaky but determined. "Of course it's not done. Things like that don't go down easy." Nia tugged at Jake's sleeve, speaking urgently in her melodic language. Bolt processed her words quickly. "She says the Scareth will recover if not fully destroyed. Its regenerative abilities allow it to heal even severe injuries." Jake clenched his jaw. They were running out of time and options. The plasma flare had been used, his rifle was out of commission, and the cavern was a fragile shelter at best. He glanced at Nia, who was watching him with unwavering trust, and then at Bolt, whose glowing eyes seemed to flicker with something close to concern. "All right," Jake said, exhaling sharply. "If it's going to heal, we finish this now." Nia pointed toward the center of the cavern, where the largest cluster of glowing crystals pulsed faintly. She spoke rapidly, her tone urgent yet hopeful. Bolt translated as she gestured to the Scareth's position. "She says the energy stored in those crystals is powerful enough to destroy the Scareth, but we would need to detonate them directly." Jake stared at the glowing crystals, their faint hum resonating through the cavern. They looked fragile, but he could feel the raw energy radiating from them. Detonating those crystals could work, but it would be dangerous, and there was no guarantee they'd escape the blast. "Nia," Jake said, crouching to meet her gaze, "if we do this, we'll need to be fast. Can you lead us out of here once the crystals are set to blow?" She nodded without hesitation, her silver eyes filled with resolve. Jake couldn't help but smile. "You're braver than most people I know." He turned to Bolt. "You're the best at precision. Can you rig the crystals for a remote detonation?" Bolt beeped affirmatively. "Affirmative. Estimated time required. 3 minutes." Suggest initiating evacuation once the sequence begins. Jake nodded. Do it. Bolt floated to the crystal cluster, extending its mechanical arms to work on the delicate task of linking the energy cores. Jake and Nia moved toward the edge of the cavern, keeping watch as the Skarath's faint growls began to echo once more. The rubble shifted slightly, a chilling reminder that their enemy was far from defeated. Hurry it up, Bolt, Jake urged, his grip tightening on the hilt of his plasma blade. Completion at 70%, Bolt replied, its voice steady despite the tension. The Skarath let out a low guttural growl, its red eyes flickering back to life beneath the rubble. Jake's pulse quickened. The creature was waking up, and it wouldn't stay trapped for long. Nia, get ready to run, Jake said, positioning himself between her and the Skarath. He raised his plasma blade, its faint blue glow the only light against the encroaching shadow of the beast. With a deafening roar, the Skarath surged upward, scattering rubble like leaves in a storm. Its obsidian scales glinted in the faint light, and its claws gouged deep marks into the cavern floor. Jake held his ground, his heart pounding but his resolve firm. Bolt, status, Jake shouted over the creature's roars. Detonation sequence complete. Setting timer. 30 seconds, Bolt replied, retreating from the crystals. Jake grabbed Nia's hand. Go. Now. They sprinted toward the narrow tunnel, Bolt trailing behind them. The Skarath roared and lunged, its massive claws missing them by inches as they dove into the passageway. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the beast gave chase, its movements frantic and destructive. The countdown echoed in Jake's mind. 20 seconds, 10 seconds. They burst into the open air just as the cavern behind them erupted in a brilliant flash of light. The ground shook violently, and a deafening roar filled the air as the Skarath was engulfed in a massive explosion. The force of the blast knocked Jake, Nia, and Bolt to the ground, sending a wave of heat and debris over them. When the dust finally settled, Jake lifted his head to see the entrance to the cavern completely collapsed. The Skarath's roars were gone, replaced by an eerie silence. He let out a shaky breath, relief washing over him. It's over, he muttered, turning to Nia, who was already smiling despite her exhaustion. Bolt hovered nearby, its sensors scanning the wreckage. Threat neutralized, Bolt confirmed. The Skarath's life signs have ceased. Jake slumped back onto the ground, a grin spreading across his face. I don't know about you two, but I'm officially retiring from monster hunting after this. Nia laughed softly, a sound that was both musical and full of gratitude. For the first time since they met, Jake saw her truly relax. They had survived. Together. A new beginning. The skies above the forest were painted with hues of amber and violet as the twin suns set, their light filtering through the shattered crystal trees. Jake leaned against the charred hull of the starbound rover, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The weight of their survival still pressed heavily on his chest, but for the first time, he allowed himself to breathe deeply. Nia stood a few paces away, staring at the stars that had begun to dot the evening sky. Her silver eyes reflected the soft glow, and for the first time, her expression was one of quiet wonder rather than fear. Bolt hovered silently between them, its sensors scanning for any lingering threats, though Jake knew they wouldn't come. The Skarath was gone, buried beneath the rubble of the cavern. Hard to believe we're still standing, Jake said, breaking the silence. He glanced at Nia, who turned to him with a small smile. You're tougher than you look, you know that. Nia tilted her head, her shimmering hair catching the fading sunlight. She said something in her melodic language, and Bolt translated with its usual precision. She says you are too. And thank you. Jake chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Well, you're welcome. Though, to be fair, you saved us just as much as I saved you. Nia's smile widened, her youthful features softening. She gestured toward the ship, then to the forest, her words flowing quickly and earnestly. Bolt translated. She says this planet is her home, but it's not safe anymore. She wishes to leave with you, to find a place where she can live without fear. Jake hesitated, his gaze shifting to the dense forest around them. The planet was beautiful, a place of endless wonder and danger. But he understood Nia's desire to leave. The Skarath might have been the apex predator, but it wasn't the only threat lurking in the shadows. "You're welcome on my ship," Jake said finally, his voice steady. "I can take you to a colony, a place where you'll be safe, where you can start fresh." Nia's eyes brightened, her gratitude clear. She took a step closer to Jake and held out her hand, a gesture he recognized as universal. He shook it firmly, sealing the unspoken promise between them. Bolt beeped, its sensors turning toward the distant horizon. Recommendation: departure within the hour. Atmospheric anomalies detected. This region may become unstable due to the cavern collapse. Jake smirked. Always the optimist. "Huh, Bolt." He turned to Nia. "Looks like we're heading out sooner rather than later. Hope you don't mind tight quarters. My ship's not exactly built for luxury." Nia tilted her head in curiosity, then laughed softly, the sound musical against the quiet backdrop of the forest. She followed Jake toward the starbound rover, her steps lighter now, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. As they boarded the ship, Jake glanced back one last time at the alien landscape. This planet had been a nightmare and a miracle all at once. It had tested him in ways he hadn't expected, but it had also given him something he hadn't realized he was searching for, a purpose beyond survival. "All right, let's get out of here," Jake said, settling into the pilot's seat. Nia sat beside him, her wide eyes taking in every detail of the cockpit. Bolt plugged into the ship's interface, its mechanical arms adjusting the controls with practiced ease. As the engines roared to life, Jake glanced at Nia. "You ready for a whole new world?" Nia nodded, her silver eyes shimmering with excitement and hope. Jake smiled, flipping the final switch. The starbound rover lifted off the ground, leaving the glowing forest behind. As they soared into the sky, the stars stretched out before them, infinite and full of possibilities. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt a sense of peace. They had survived the darkness, and now they were heading toward the light. A new beginning for them both. "Hang on, Nia," Jake said, his grin widening. "The galaxy's a big place, but I got a feeling we'll find your place in it." And with that, they disappeared into the stars, leaving behind the dangers of the past and stepping boldly into the future.